Now, whenever you are sending a request to AWS, let's see what is the flow of a request whenever a request is being sent. So you want to talk to AWS, and whatever the method is, you decide to work on that. Everything behind the scene as a API, right? So we talked about that everything behind the scene is working through an API call. Whatever you do, it get translated into an API and then it goes into the AWS endpoint. Now, where the request goes, anyone? The request goes into endpoints. My question to you is, do we have one endpoint for AWS or we have endpoint per service? What do you think? Endpoint is the address where you go and send your request to. You do not manually go ahead and do this thing like selecting an endpoint. It automatically happens. So yes, it is per service. Every service has its endpoint, and some services even would have a regional endpoint, right? Because they are regional service, and some of them may have a global endpoint also. So it depends on what type of service you are talking to. You may have a regional endpoint or a global endpoint, and some of the services may have both. So it depends. But yeah, it's a endpoint where you're talking to. You are not making that endpoint request manually, like you do not say talk to abc.com, but it happens behind the scene by automatically the tools we use now. When you are sending this request, what happens behind the scene? Let's talk about that. The request goes through IAM. Anything which you are doing has to go through IAM, no exception. There are very few exceptions, but consider, let's say, most of the thing what you are doing has to go through IAM, and IAM decides on whether to allow that request or deny that request, depending on the privilege assigned, depending on the permissions associated with your application users or users, there would be a request allowed or denied. While this happens, another service comes into picture is called CloudTrail. It is like what I call it as a camera. It is recording everything happening in your AWS account. So whether the request was allowed or denied, everything is happening behind the scene and CloudTrail is recording it. CloudTrail keeps this data by default for 90 days, but obviously you could go ahead and change it to your own requirement and keep it for longer period. You could push it to an S3 bucket and keep it there for as long as you want. So that should not be a problem at all. So I hope this thing is clear. Let's move forward. Once this thing are done, once IAM allows request CloudTrail record, then the request is released to your endpoint, and that's how your request will be taken care. Right. We will be set. Yeah, let me remove that. Yeah, I have to still get that. Not we will be starting soon. Let me remove that. Give me a minute. That has to stop, and let hope I am able to figure out a way to do that. Just give me a minute, please. Come on. Show display name and video clips, background music, banners. Banners, yeah, let me hide that. Hopefully it is gone now. No distractions. Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for telling me. Now, could you please touch base on OIDC? We will see, Sam, but I'll share you one more information in a minute that I have put a training on Udemy, which has more information. So that will help you. Okay, so once you have this, we are using IAM for two things. What two things IAM offers me? First thing it offers me is authentication, right? And second, it offers me is authorization. Now, authentication and authorization are very different thing, but sometimes people relate them to the same kind of component. But I would explain that they are different. Let's go ahead and take an example, as I prefer to use analogies. Let's say you are traveling to a country. If you are traveling to a country, you may be going through a passport control, and in passport control, you present your passport. And that passport would have your photo, would have a visa. Let's say you're visiting Shenzhen area, so Schengen visa would be there. Passport tells the passport officer who you are. It has your photo, it has your date of birth, it has a number associated, and some more cryptic information which you do not read, but the machines can read and identify the details about the passport. So that what you are, who you are, is your authentication. So I am Ashish and I present my passport, it would have the same detail. They would compare my face which is into the photo, and then they would say yes, this is the right person. So that is one part, which is authentication. Second part is, am I allowed to enter in the country or not? Or if I am allowed, what can I do there? So that is my visa type. I may have a tourist visa for a place, I may have a work visa to go into a country and work there. That is what we mean by authorization, like what can you do. So Though it is a very simple thing, but you better be aware that authentication is just verification. On authorization is allowing you to what you do. Same example, like you go to a ATM machine to withdraw cash, you put your card, you enter your PIN number, that is your authentication. You are verifying you are a valid user. And afterward, you go ahead and say, I want to withdraw money or check my balance. That is what authorizations are there for you. So hopefully this thing is clear. Let's see now how we access other services in AWS. So when we are accessing services on AWS, most of the time we use three methods. We use a management console, a graphical interface. We use command line interfaces also, and we may use tools and SDKs if we have written a program or application. It may want to go ahead and make the connection to AWS services, maybe EC2 machine code talking to a S3 bucket or a Lambda functions code talking to a DynamoDB. That would be all done by accessing these AWS services, and this information are all API calls. Right now, I would be using management console, and if I'm using that, I have to use a username and password there, and that username and password would be my 12-digit account ID and IAM username. I would be providing a MFA if it is configured, so that would be ensuring that I am a valid user. So username and password allows me to log in. That is my authentication. Anyone, how I authenticate on command line and SDK? Anyone knows about it? What methods of authentication we use in command line and in tools and SDK. Anyone? How I authenticate into command line and on tools on SDK using secret access key? Exactly. So the another mechanism of authentication is keys. So access key and secret access key, which is a randomly generated string pattern for you, is what we use to authenticate to command line and to tools and SDK. So that would be using my access key, secret access key, and I can configure it on a command line using something called AWS configure, and through this I am able to access AWS services. Right. So this is clear. This is not a very complicated stuff. And yes, AWS configure is the command we use. And sometimes if you are using some IDE, like here, I have taken a screenshot from PyCharm. If you use PyCharm, which is your IDE for Python, it has an option to configure your credential. So you could configure your credential into your IDE. And IAM role if deployed on AWS, yes, exactly. But IAM role, Sam, are still using keys, right? You do not generate those keys, and I will touch upon that. Even if you are using a role are also using a key. A service behind the scene gives them the key, though you don't see it. But if you want, you could get hold of that key, and through that you can access it. But technically, still there is a key mechanism, even if it is being used by a role. So roles are still using key. Okay, I'll explain that now. So what I can do in IAM, obviously I could create users and all. And one thing which confuses a lot of people is called permissions. Now, idea of permission is simple. Permission is a document which is written into a JSON format, right? And this JSON document is what I could associate with something called IAM identities. So when I have a user or a group or a role, those are called as an identities. They are identifying someone, either an individual or multiple members of a group, or they are identifying a role. So these are called my IAM identities. And once you have IAM identities assigned with policy, that makes up permission. Right. Now these words are used sometime interchangeably, like I am using a policy or I am having a permission and all, but these are two different things. Permissions is what is result of assigning a policy to an IAM identity, and IAM identity could be a user, group, or role, and that is all there inside AWS, which you go ahead and create. Right. IAM is a global service, so whatever you create would be there into the whole environment. Let's say if I go to my console here and I'm trying to access IAM as a service, this is manage access to AWS resources. So through this, I should be able to create groups, a user, role, policy, and different stuff associated. And Jamila would be talking about some of the actions and help you to understand how all these things work. Right. So user is a common concept which we always find in most of the operating systems and most of the application, that you can create a user. Like maybe I am currently a user into Google, and that's why I have mail access, I have access to the YouTube videos and all. So that is my user. Now, With a user, if you want, you could create a multi-factor authentication. Right. Multi-factor authentication ensure that you have additional layer of security, and this multi-factor authentication can be added by your software tokens or by hardware token. Like if you have some devices or keys, those can also be used to create these multi-factor authentication. So if their users are like root, obviously you should go ahead and create MFA with that. Right now I am getting a warning in my IAM dashboard that I do not have a root user assigned, so that is not a good thing. I should take care of that. Now, what is a root user? Let's talk a little bit on that. So as soon as you say I want to create an AWS account, first user, to create an AWS account, you need an email address, right? And that email address becomes your root user. Root is a pretty powerful account, and this root user should not be used for your day-to-day work. You should only use when you actually need it. Maybe sometime, let's say you have to uh, uh, control your billing, or maybe modify some billing information, some credit card details or something, then only you should be using root user. And in our first session, Prasad talked about how to create a safe account following 5 steps once your AWS account is ready. And one of them is to create an admin level user so that he or she can perform various tasks associated with that. So root is not to be used on a lightly basis. It should be used in very, very crucial circumstances. Another useful tip I would give you, like keep your right email addresses into your account, right? Now, what happens that maybe if you are managing account of a company, when the account was created, a different email address was used, and now that email address is no longer valid, or the person left or whatever, or nobody monitoring it, and that can create problem. Sometimes if there are some critical events in your AWS account, AWS support can try to reach you out, saying that looks like this account is victim of some issues, or maybe there is something fishy which is happening and we want to talk to you about it. And that time, if I do not have a valid email address, then it becomes a little complicated for them. So every time, let's say you are managing account, ensure that you have the right email address and somebody actually monitoring those things. Don't just put them into spam. Monitor those addresses which comes to you, monitor those emails which comes to you from your AWS support team, right? So that is my user group. And so if I see here, user creation, not a very complicated stuff. You could go ahead and create user if you want, should not be a problem. You could create user groups, and pay attention to the name. Its name is user group. So what you could add into a group, only users. You cannot create a nested group here. You are only allowed to have a group in which more users can be part, but a group cannot be part of another group, right? Then roles, I'll talk in detail about roles because this is a highly misunderstood topic. So I'll explain some of these things. And these are my policies which I can use to control access to my users and what they can perform and what they cannot perform. So if I see here, these are all my policies there. Everything I do is a API call, whether I'm creating a user or assigning them permission or giving them some access. Everything is a, a API call, and policies are pretty simple. If I go ahead, copy this and put it on Notepad, you should not have a problem in understanding the very basics of what a policy is allowing me to do. So here you are saying this policy is version this. This is the JSON version. This was created using a visual editor, which is a tool, and we have allow, and we are allowing two type of action here. S3 colon star means everything related to S3, and EC2 colon star, which means everything related to EC2. So that is what we are allowing our users to do inside it. Policy itself is of no use unless and until I associate it with an entity. That entity could be your user, could be group, or could be a role. Question to you: can I assign multiple policies to a user group or a role? Can I assign multiple policies to a user group or role? What do you think? Yes, we can. Yes, we can, obviously. And that would help us in ensuring that we are giving them required access and not creating a bulk policy on this particular case. So to use user and a group to a user and a group, yes, we can assign even all to the role also. So roles can also be associated with a policy. So we'll see that. And I'm not going into the user creation part and in the group creation part because Jamila would be taking care of that into hands-on. But the idea is this entity helps you to manage your AWS environment. Now, one thing which is also good to have is called identity providers. Let me explain this concept. Right. Do we have any restriction on number of policies? I don't think so. But again, I don't want to like overcomplicate my stuff. I would probably have policies associated with the uh, role a user is playing, let's say developer or QA. So I am not aware. There may be something, some number, some very high number that how many policies can be associated, but I'm not aware about that. There is a policy size limit may be there, but not on the number of policies. So I'm not aware on that. I may have to check on that. Anyone can check if there is a limit of number of policies. I doubt it, but let's still check it. Policy size limit is there. So yes, there is a size limit on the policy. Again, it is depending in the sense that if you are using a S3 bucket, in that the policy size limit is 20K. It cannot go beyond that. Right. Good. Next question I have here, do we have a limit to the number of user group or roles we can have? I believe it is 5,000. So 5,000 users you could create into IAM, but nothing beyond it. And all these type of questions, I would say check IAM quotas. So in a quota, we will tell you that what are the service quota for a specific service. So same way for every service, there is a quota like for Lambda, for your EC2. So check those quota and it will tell you that what you could do and how much of that particular service you could utilize on that. So identity and access management and quota for service quotas. Let's see this thing here. So active quota, nope, this one is not service quota. I'm looking for IAM service quota. Let's see that. Quota name, requirement, and characters. Probably this is the right one. And here I should be able to see some of the details. So see this. So customer managed policy in account 1500. Maximum you can go to this. What is default? That this is in as soon as you create an account. But if you want to go beyond, then you have to raise a request to AWS and we would be able to create it for you, then higher number. Groups are 300, manage policy 10, and then role trust policy length, role in AWS account, you could have up to 1000, and then IAM entities, how many access keys can they have, what are the other information. So this information, and see user in AWS account 5,000. If you large number, use temporary security credentials. So these are some of the details, and let me put this link into the chat. It's a good to bookmark, but it is not something which you would be hitting in your exams. Exam probably will not be asking you these numbers because these numbers can change, and that is not a good idea of anyone's ability, because these are just static number. You could come here and check, but it is good to know that most of the services have some quota, some are default and some are maximum. Right. So I hope this thing is clear. Good. No worries at all. So I was trying to explain you about something called identity provider. Let me explain that. So let's say this is my IAM AWS account, and in AWS account I want to have a IAM user. So I could go ahead into IAM, create a user here, no problem at all. But what if I have 10,000 users to create? I want to give my 10,000 corporate employees to access AWS services, and it would be nightmare to create those many users into IAM and let my employees remember two password and username, one for their traditional login and one for AWS. So that is very complicated. So in these kind of cases, what we support connection of a identity provider that we refer as IDP. That stands for identity provider. So when I'm using identity provider, idea is that I would connect to some of the services which are already having users created. So I would have users here. IDP we support two, and I would say one is your SAML based and another one is your open ID based. These are the two common mechanisms for authentication. SAML, whenever I say, it means your Active Directory and Shillabot, these are all your SAML based. And when I say open ID, Facebook, Google, Amazon login, mostly web identities, those are your open ID based access. So you could connect it. So what you could do, you could establish a trust relationship from your IAM up to your identity provider, whether it is through SAML or OpenID. And then if your user exists in some locations, those can be allowed to assume a role here. What you would do, once your user get authenticated into your Active Directory or somewhere, then they would be allowed to assume a role in AWS, and based on that role they would be doing some work. So that would help me in keeping number of users in IAM into lower numbers, and all of my users would be coming from identity provider. So that integration always possible, and most of the organization would go with this kind of architecture. Otherwise it would be nightmare to manage so many users. Are we clear on this? Any questions, any doubts, any confusions here so far? Organization is a different thing. So there was a mention of organization. I would cover that topic some other time, but it has a different meaning. It is for multiple AWS account. I am right now focusing on a small enterprise where we have only one AWS account. So that is my call identity provider. Now let me focus on one of the component which is very confusing sometime, because sometime this is different than real world. So we will see that. Yeah, so yes, that is true. So that is true. So you are saying here that signing into Amazon online to gain access to your certificate account. I would say that is a single sign-on mechanism, right? So that is a single sign-on where you are getting logged in once and then you access multiple services. So we will see that, right? So that is how that certification account works. Question is, how does it integrate with LDAP? So what you have to do, let me quickly show that. So here I'm an identity provider. If I have to integrate with LDAP, I have to say, hey, I want to add a provider, and I would go to my Active Directory Federation services and then generate a metadata file from there. And that metadata file, I would be uploading it here. It would be basically an XML document or XSLT document through which it would be knowing that which particular device service to connect to, right? So you would come here into your console, and the process of generating this metadata file could be different. If you are connecting to Active Directory, it could be different. If you are connecting to Shibboleth, it would be different. So just check that, and it will be obviously different. It will be a URL where you would be connecting if it is an open ID connect. So you just point that file here, or you just point that URL here, and we should be able to then get association with those. Probably in some places it would be a two-step process. You would request it from here, and you will go to your Active Directory and say, yes, I trust it, so I accept that trust, and then my two-way communication would be starting in that case, right? So that's how you will integrate your LDAP here. Okay, now let me now focus on the other concept, which is called roles. Roles are sometimes very highly misunderstood, and I will use some analogies to explain you some of the concept so you could understand it better. Probably most of you relate this character here, this famous actor Jim Carrey. He's a Canadian American actor, and he has been into lots of movies, really great actor, and he has worked in different movies. I'm just giving some examples here. So Bruce Almighty, he played a role of a god. In The Mask, probably most of us have seen that. He played a role of a green thing. And in S. Ventura, he played a role of a pet detective. I didn't know he was Canadian. Yeah, he's a Mex-American Canadian. So yeah, Canadian American actor. Now, what is happening here? This is one person, but depending on the movie, he is assuming these character or he is becoming this characters. So temporarily, let's say he's shooting for the mask, so he would go into the makeup of this green thing, would paint his face, would have a fancy yellow color suit on himself, and once he's done, he would come out of it and again become Jim Carrey. I don't think that he would be going to every place dressed like this. Not every place. Probably when he is on a movie set, he may be using this. So what he is doing actually here, he is assuming a role. He is becoming something, finishing his or her work, and then coming back to what they were doing beforehand. That's what we mean by a role. So, roles are the best way of assuming something, doing something, and then going forward and performing those specific tasks. Yes, it is a temporary, exactly, Rashmi. So we don't want it to be permanent. I don't think that Jim Carrey would like to be 24-hour dressed like this or have a funny hairdo like this. So probably he would come back to become himself like this. So that's what we are doing. So this is an identity, and we are trusting our identity to assume a role of it. So a movie director has to say that, hey Jim, you are going to be playing a role of a mask, and this is how it would be. And in that, you would have some superpowers. Like in this movie Bruce Almighty, he played a role of God, and he was able to do lots of crazy things. Obviously nobody can stop God. So same thing here. Let me now relate this example to your AWS account, and I hope you would be able to retain this concept for a longer period now. Now, I don't know why, but Jim Carrey is the best example of this role. I'm going a little bit deeper into the movie The Mask. If you remember the movie, this is the mask which he could wear and he becomes a different person altogether, right? That's what we are doing here. He would do, he would assume the role of a green thing, finish the work, and once work is done, he would again become Jim Carrey. So that's exactly what happens when he has wore this mark. He has got some superpowers which are beyond this person who was named as Stanley Ipkiss into the movie, who was a bank clerk, and now he has become a green thing. So when you are assuming a role, you come out of this persona and you assume a new persona altogether. It is completely different set of credential which will be given to you, and then you can perform various tasks depending on what you are allowed to perform, and you can consume whatever you want. So what happens behind the scene, let me talk about some of the mechanism behind the scene. What happens? So this is your AWS account. In that AWS account, we have a role created. Role itself won't give you power. What you have to do, yeah, exactly, that is also true. That is Shaktiman. I like that. Shaktiman, if for people do not know, it is a Indian superhero, Indian Superman, and Spider-Man. Obviously, a lot of people know, so shouldn't be a problem. So in AWS, we have a role created, and what I could do, I could assume this role, and that will be done by an identity. Now, this identity could be a IAM user, no problem at all on that, or it could be an external user who is coming from any other identity provider, doesn't have any problem at all. So what you could do, you could go ahead and create a role in AWS, and that role can be assumed by IAM user or external user if you want. Now, role itself is of no use. With role, what you have to do, you have to also associate a permission, or which is what we refer here as a policy. So role would be just assumable, but the policy is which is giving us power to perform various tasks, right? Another example of assuming a role could be, let's say we log into Linux machine, so we get to dollar prompt, right? So we are, let's say here I am saying I want to do yum install httpd. Probably my request will be getting denied. Why? Because I do not have permission to install something. I am logged in as a standard user. So what we do in that case, we say sudo and whatever command. This is what we are doing. We are saying, hey, perform the task as a super user, or you could just say, I don't want to change anything. I just say sudo, and my prompt now changes to hash, which is a indication that I am now on to a higher privilege. And once my work is done, I would now go ahead and say exit, and I would come back to where I was. So this is again an example of switching a role, but in Linux context, right? Coming back to this, so now I have a role and a policy associated. At a time, you can assume only one role, nothing beyond it. And role can be assumed within account or across account, no problem at all on that. Once you assume a role, your existing identity goes back and you get a new identity associated by which you should be able to get a policy on that, and then you can perform various tasks associated. So I hope this is clear. Now, question is, if I have a role created like this, what stops user Ashish to assume that role or user Jamila or Abhijit to assume that role? Anyone? If I have a role created, how I can control that only one of these person or all of them can assume that role? What is the way of controlling who can assume the role? Anyone? How I control who can assume a role? I don't want everyone to assume a role. That would be a nightmare. Anyone? Trust relationship, I agree. So there is something called a trust relationship, right? And through this trust relationship, you could ensure that only specific people are allowed to access this particular thing. So yes, there is a trust relationship. Don't call it trust relationship, but it is a trust policy. So actual word for that is called a trust policy. And now again, I have some crazy ideas to explain you the trust policy. Let me go ahead with that crazy idea and explain you. Yeah, you can think about me and you can judge that I am more inclined toward movies and all. Let me take another example of movie here. Trust policy, yes, that exactly the thing, Haripriya. That is what exactly I am going to explain you about trust policy. Right. Service control policy is different. Service control policy has nothing to do with role assumption, but it sets boundary for what maximum you can get, right? So Sunandam, it has nothing to do with role. It just control what maximum you could achieve in your account if you have a service control policy associated, and it would only come into picture if you are using AWS organization. Without it won't work. Right. Now, I'm going to the next topic to explain you the trust policy. People who are Marvel fan or read Marvel comics or watch Marvel movies, they would know about Thor. It's a god of thunder, and this person has a hammer which is called Mjolnir, and that is something which gives him power for doing whatever crazy thing he wants to do. So this Mjolnir is not something which I could go ahead and pick up or any other person can pick up. Hope you get the idea. So anyone who wants to pick up that hammer, it would check, Mjolnir would check, is it person Thor? If it is, I would allow it, right? Otherwise, I won't be allowing a person to lift myself. So that's what exactly happening. This trust Thor to lift it. Similarly, you would have a role created, and in that role, you would create a trust policy, and in that trust policy, you would have utilized these things. Right. So hopefully this thing is clear and you get an idea on what is a trust policy. So trust policy allows you to define who can actually assume that particular thing. Should not be a problem at all. You could define whoever it is, and then in the list you could add IAM users, or you could add any other users coming from other identity providers. So roles are really, really useful for whatever you perform in your account, right? Hopefully everyone is following along. Question from Sunandam. Sir, I have a question. Where can I share those? So I would say put them into chat. If it's very long, then reach out on LinkedIn. Otherwise, if it is something which I could answer right now related to IAM, put them into chat and let everyone get benefited by get those questions. So no problem. But if it is something else, you could utilize LinkedIn on that. All right, good. Okay, now what is that? Question is, are service link role created automatically? Answer is yes. A lot of role would happen automatically into AWS. They would be creating these roles for you just to facilitate your working. We don't want everything to be done by manually. So we will have a lot of role pre-created for you, but you are not bound to use them. It is just easy for you to use them, but it is not mandatory to use them. You can create your own role if the need be, right? So hope trust policy is there. Now let me give you an example. Let's say you want to allow a user Q1 to assume a role, giving him or her permission equivalent to a developer user. So what I would need to do that, I want my Q1 user, maybe this is a QA person, and he wants to become a developer to perform something. Let's see what happens in this case. What is the three-step process I have to follow? So what I have to do first, I have to create a role, right? So this role is something I would be creating, same like I create a user or a group. Similarly, I could create a role. Once I have this role created, I would add Q1 as a trusted principal to assume the role. So I would assume this role and say, Q1, I am allowing you to assume this particular role. And on that role, I would associate permissions which were equivalent to a developer user, and then only your application would be able to assume a role. So this is what happens behind the scene. Let me quickly go into console and show you a quick switch of a role. So I'm here currently logged in as a admin underscore ash user. This is my account ID which I am logged into. And if I see this thing here, these are my role history. So AWS console maintains up to 5 previous role you have assumed, and through this you should be able to switch role. When I want to switch a role, I need to know the account I want to switch role in. It could be the same account, right? So I could put the number here. I need to know the role I would be assuming. So I should know the name of the role I want to assume, and I could display a better name for that. So let me call it as a I am a QA admin. I just want to display it, and I could go ahead and create a different color icon to identify that I am in a different role, and now I am switching a role. So I was in different account as admin underscore ash, and now I have switched and become a different person in a different account altogether. Here you could see I am a QA admin, and this is a different account. And what I have did, I have assumed role. I am currently active as this user. I signed it initially as admin underscore ash, and now I have assumed the role of QA admin. Let me show you this role. This role exists in this account, which is 8634. So let me go ahead to this role and show you what is there. So I'm going to my QA role. So this is my QA admin role, which I want to assume. See this trusted entity to whom I am trusting this role to be assumed by. So this is my trust relationship on the role. And here I am saying I am allowing a user coming from this account to assume the role. I have given root means everyone in that account access, but if I want, I could have restricted it to a very specific use case if the need be, and we could put some conditions also if you can retire. Right. So thanks Farna for mentioning that. This is the right definition, the official one. Trust policy defined which principals can assume the role and under which conditions. So this is my trust policy. I am saying anyone from this account can assume a role. Why? Because I have given them a permission called STS assume role. STS behind the scene is the service which is giving you the temporary token. I would give you an example in a minute. What is this STS service and how it works? But this is what my trust policy is. So I am assuming role, and then what can I do with that role? That would be controlled through the permission which I have associated. So here I have given administrator access permission to this role, and that's why they can perform all the stuff if the need be. So I hope this thing is clear. And if I'm done with my work, I could switch back and I can utilize. Can we say principal is a user? Why not? You can. Any identity can be principal here. So see this. In a principal, I have used this, but I could have gone back and I could have said that, hey, I want to update this policy, and instead of instead of root, I want someone else name to be added there so they could perform that operation. So yes, you could put anyone's name here, even somebody, I mean, coming from external services, they can also be part of it. So yes, you can have principal as a user, but it is not required to be only IAM user. It can come from outside also. All right. I would say any identity can assume a role. That's all. Okay. Any questions so far? Any doubts? Any confusions on this? Okay. So you have a role. Role has a trust policy. Trust policy says who can assume a role, and then you have permission which tell what you can do after assume a role. And policies we saw that can be assigned to a user, or policy can be assigned to a group, and you can use a role to be assumed by a user, or you could assume a role through a service also. So services which are there, like your EC2 services or Lambda services, they can also assume role and perform various operation in the account. So that is all possible. Right. So that was a quick introduction. I'll quickly summarize it. So role can be assumed within AWS account or across account. At a time, only one role can be assumed, right? In AWS, the roles are represented by a hat, right? Not the best drawing for a hat, but you get the idea. So at a time, a person can have one hat only, nothing beyond it. So just be aware, at a time you can wear only one hat, nothing beyond it. So if you want to assume another role, you have to log off from one role and then wear another hat that will give you access to another role. A service can assume a role like SQS can assume a role. Yes, exactly. So that is true. Service can assume a role. SQS do not write anything, Sunanda. SQS is not compute. So you would need a Lambda function or a EC2 machine or some code execution engine like container who could read from SQS because they would need compute power to perform a read operation on SQS. So SQS won't write itself. What you would be doing in this case, you would have a SQS. Let me draw that. So in this case, you would have a SQS queue, and in that SQS queue, you would have your application data. This is what you want to write to a database, but you would need somewhere in between, maybe a Lambda function, maybe a EC2 machine, maybe a container who would read and who would perform write. So SQS can't assume a role and write it. That won't work for you. Compute services that where we want to execute some code, maybe a glue crawler, maybe a EC2 machine, maybe a Lambda function, they can assume a role. I hope that thing is clear. Okay. Now, if you want to play more, I have given a link here called Try Web Identity Federation. So this will tell you about very basic stuff you can try into role assumption. This is a open service you could try. Here, they are showing you that how you log into an identity provider. Let's say I log in with Amazon.com here. And once I am authenticated in Amazon.com, Amazon.com generates a token for me. So I sent a request to Amazon.com and say, hey, Amazon, can you verify me? So it verified that I am Ashish as a user and it has given me an access token. Now, I could take this token and now talk to a service called STS, and then I'm saying I want to assume a role in a different account. This is a open application you can try on your own. So this is a role ARN. In this account, I want to assume this role if I have been verified by Amazon. So I would send a request here, and this token I'm presenting, and I'm making a call to the operation called call assume role with web identity. And now the service, which is called STS Security Token Service, has verified that I'm a valid user because I'm carrying Amazon's token, and it has generated a access key and secret access key for me. So even if you are doing roles, there is always a access key and secret access key involved, as you could see here. And once I have this access key and secret access key, I could now make call to a AWS service. Like here, I am making a call to an S3 service and say I want to list the bucket in that account, and I am able to see the buckets which are available into this particular account. That's what I'm doing. And if I want to run another action, get object, so I am getting the get object response from it. So even with the role, there is always a token involved which is generated by STS as a service. So I hope everyone has got a better idea on how these stuff work. What I have also done, I have yesterday published a training on Udemy, free training, 2 hours. Now, I can't cover everything in that training because Udemy restricts 2 hour maximum time frame for a free training to be made available, nothing beyond it. So I have published one yesterday, and I would be sharing that link so you could go ahead and learn a little bit more on IAM, what I could not cover here. That is all available there. So just published last night. I would share this link here in the chat, so please go through that training and let me know if there are any feedback, or if you like the training, please provide the rating and enjoy it. Right. So anyone can identify who has the token can access it. So let me read the question again. What is the question? Question is, so anyone, any identity who has the token can access it? Absolutely yes, unless you put some conditions. So it is my token. Like, think like you have your office badge, right? So when you go to office, you just tap your badge, and through that badge you get access to the office. What if I give my badge to my colleague? Then my token is given to them and they can perform, right? So same thing exactly, that yes, if the token is shared with someone, then they can use it, but you may have some criteria, like some companies say, hey, you have to use fingerprint for login. So you can't use badge, because fingerprint, you can't cut your thumb and give it to someone to mark your attendance, right? So that won't work. But hope you get the idea that yes, you would need identity to assume a role. Question from Hari Krishna Reddy is, you will provide part 2 of S3 and part 2 of IAM as well on Udemy. I'm not sure on that, Hari Krishna, as of now. I have limited time, but at least the basic services I plan to cover initially, like every part 1 of core services like EC2, S3, VPC, and then when I get time, I would get more parts rolled out, but at least basics I want to cover so that everyone has a basic understanding and then they can move forward on that. All right, good, thank you. Uh, how pass roll works, we do not have time, but I would be happy to explain it maybe offline. So just get in touch and I would be happy to explain that. Thanks for Parna for sharing that. So there is a way of called pass roll. So through pass roll, I am assuming a role from another entity. So that can be done. But yeah, I would stop now. I'm already 5 minutes over. So let me put a break here and then we will come back. And obviously I have used this IAM one pager, so it will be showing this, sharing that also on the resources page. So just get hold of that and it should give you good idea on the basics of IAM as a service. Okay, so enjoy your 5 minute break and we will start soon. Thank you everyone. Talk to you in 5. I'll put a timer here.